Okay, colleagues, good evening, and I hope we are live. So, today we have a very interesting class. Today we are going to talk about Karl Marx. Um, now, Marx is a very interesting and a very complicated philosopher, very controversial philosopher. Maybe excessively controversial because of his political legacy, much more than on the basis of his writings. So, Ellen Ryan, an important political philosopher from an important scholar of political philosophy from the University of Oxford, if I'm not mistaken, says that if sort of history of the 20th century played itself out in a slightly different fashion, and Marx did not get associated with Soviet-style communism, then basically our reception of Marx would have been completely different. And honestly, I think there's a lot of truth to that assertion, and I will try to explain this position tonight. So basically, what I'm driving at, and I suppose the takeaway point from this opening gambit, right? Talking about Marx in the context of Soviet communism. My point is very simple. My point is very simple. When we approach Marx, we should try to forget everything that we know about the Soviet Union. This, by and large, is not going to help us, as far as I can tell. Um, okay, I'm trying to double check that the stream was working at the same time. Might not be the best idea, but nevertheless, let me try to. We should try to. Okay. Yeah, seems seems to be working. So let me try to explain in basic terms why I think Marx is important for us today. Now, of course, the title of our course is Philosophy and Methodology of the Natural and the Social Sciences. So I will not, in many different ways one could approach Marx. I think the best way actually to approach Marx is as a political philosopher. Marx, first and foremost, was a political philosopher, and especially his discussion of the economy, of the economic sphere. In his discussion of economics, Marx tries to bring out the political dimension of the economy. And I'm going to talk about this in a second. So I suppose before we begin, let me start somewhere. So there are internal tensions in Marx. And we have to remember that, contrary to what some Marxists believe, uh, 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 Marx is not God the Father. In a sense that Marx was an alive human being, and his views evolved. As far as we can tell, there's the early period, middle period, late period. Marx disagreed with himself. He changed his views a lot. And in fact, many of his important ideas are contained in his unpublished writings. And this is a big problem. So unpublished works. That many works are unpublished and are not ready for publication. So they're unpublished and unpublishable. So why? Because they are drafts. Also, I should say that many students start reading Marx with the Communist Manifesto. And Communist Manifesto is an interesting work, and I think it's worth reading, but we have to remember that Marx himself thinks that Communist Manifesto is, you can put this differently, is wrong in a sense of being outdated. And this is what Marx himself later says in the later editions of the Communist Manifesto. And Marx insists that it's they're going to continue to publish the Communist Manifesto as is because it is a historical document and it is valuable as a historical document. But strictly speaking, it should be amended. Now, what exactly should be amended there is a complicated question. I'm not sure if we'll get there today. But let me just signal it again. There are complexities which most people overlook. But and again, sort of to some extent, when people try to defend Marx, sometimes what ends up happening is that Marx becomes too broad or too vague and not exactly like not wrong, but at the same time far too vague to be saying something interesting or productive. So I want to try to bring out a meaningful kernel of Marxist philosophy today, at least in some preliminary fashion. So also something I forgot to mention, but that's okay. You know, this is the joy of live lectures. So and the thing that I forgot to mention is that I'm not sure how far I'll be able to get to, how far I'll be able to get through Marx today. So there's a backup. And the backup is there's a last year's lecture, and I think that the lecture is what's the right phrase? It is very intense. It's very condensed. I say a lot of things, and it's also maybe slightly more technical than what I'm trying to do today. But by all means, I definitely invite and encourage you to look at the lecture. I have uploaded it to YouTube this morning, so you can hopefully find it without much trouble on the channel. So many things to say and many places one could begin. Let me try to maybe pause and let me try to start with the conclusions. So why Marx is important? Why Marx is important? And yeah, I suppose maybe I should say sort of maybe I should start with this question: am I a Marxist? Right, and immediately one could say, okay, why the heck am I talking about this, right? Why am I talking about this? As a teacher, shouldn't I keep my views out of the classroom? And in many ways, I agree with that completely. It's not pedagogical. It goes against the ethics of the university, and I agree with that assertion in general. That sort of, again, very much the purpose of this class is not to indoctrinate you into my particular prejudice. And in this sense, definitely, when I talk about Marx, I should stress that I'm not, in any shape or form, I'm not a dogmatic Marxist. So the way I sometimes phrase it is I'm a skeptic first, Marxist second. Skeptic first, Marxist second. But at the same time, but at the same time, I think a couple of things I want to say. So one is that I think you should be aware of my biases. So I'm trying to disclose. So it's a disclosure and a disclaimer, right? It's a disclosure and a disclaimer that yes, I am a Marxist. My view is biased. I am coming from a particular perspective. I'm coming from a Marxist background when I approach many issues. So you should be aware of that, right? I could try to conceal that. I could say no. Sort of not make my prejudice explicit, and leave it up to you to make your own conclusions. But I think it's fairer. And in many ways, I am opening myself to a lot of criticism when I openly admit such a thing. And I am inviting you to take this into account, and I'm inviting you to take take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is like I am not objective. You should take my words with a grain of salt. Take my words with a grain of salt. I suppose maybe this is the first point. The second, let me go back to my previous point, which was the first and now becomes the second. So I'm not a dogmatic Marxist. Remember Karl Popper, and I am a big believer in Karl Popper's method. Yes, you will remember that Thomas Kuhn and Willard Van Orman Quine talk about certain problems in Popper. But even Quine would say, right, that, and we had a wonderful presentation by Vladislav last seminar, right? Even Quine would say that at the end of the day, our theories have to stand the trial, have to stand the test of empirical observation, right? We should test our theories against data. So, and we should definitely try as much as possible to falsify our theories. Again, um, John Stuart Mill is a very important philosopher for me, and I'm thinking maybe we should, if we had more classes, we'd definitely have a whole class on Mill. So Mill would say that you do not know the reasons for your opinions before you have examined the best opinions on the other side. So again, so Popper says that we should actively try to falsify our views, and Mill says that before we can claim a certain belief, we should try to examine the best evidence on the other side, So, or the best evidence against our views, So, I'm opening myself to criticism partly because, again, I think it's important to move to move my own thought forward, right? So I am, in fact, if some of you, for example, in the course of the seminars, change my mind or point to some problems or contradictions in Marxism, excellent. This gives me a chance to move forward. And likewise, if you are not sympathetic to Marx, maybe by examining Marxist arguments, you get a chance to move forward. Who knows? Again, I'm a big believer in the open-endedness and the dialogical nature of philosophical enterprise. Again, as Jürgen Habermas puts it, the only force that a free citizen recognizes is the peculiarly unforced force of the better argument, the zwanglosen Zwang des besseren Arguments, something like that, right? So, At the same time, I should say that Marx himself actually said. Marx himself very famously wrote in a letter to Engels, "I am not a Marxist." So this is a problem. Because when I say that I'm a Marxist, I think I have a very peculiar. Well, I don't want to say peculiar. In general, as many of you know, my main specialization is that I'm a political philosopher. I am a political philosopher by trade, and I teach. University of London course in modern University of London textbooks, right? So these would be books published by mostly Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press. So this is by and large the source of my views. And in this sense, I don't think that my view is particularly peculiar. So I would say that my understanding of Marx, by and large, I by and large agree with the I would imagine maybe you can call it a British tradition of interpretation of Marx. But at the same time, most people alive on planet Earth today who call themselves Marxists, as far as I can tell, have very little to do with Marx, especially if you think of Marxism as synonym for Stalinism or something like that, right? And I'm beating around the bush. I need to get to the more important story. So this is the basic disclaimer I think I should begin with. Okay, so let's talk about why Marx is important. So I have spent a lot of time trying to make sense of Marx. Marx is difficult, and so it's like I think that if you count the hours, I spent more hours on Marx than I've spent on any other philosopher. And then after alongside reading Marx, reading other philosophers, I had a certain chance to compare insights of Marx to insights of others. And I think that in general, Marx has certain, fundamental, crucial insights that are either lacking or not as developed in other political philosophers. And so I would say, again, this is, the reason why I would still call myself a Marxist is because I think there's a certain key element which is there in Marx, which is by and large missing from other, or if not missing, then at least not as clear and obvious in other major political philosophers. And in many ways, I think it's valuable. It's very valuable to read Plato and I don't know, Hobbes or Rousseau or even John Stuart Mill, Friedrich Nietzsche definitely. But I would prefer to read them alongside Marx. And I think unless you take Marxist insights into account, you're missing something important, even in reading Plato. Okay, so I would say that the basic idea of why Marx is important is this notion of again, this is a philosophy and methodology of the natural and the social sciences. So we try to explain human behavior in structural and historical terms. So there's no such thing as human nature. There's no fixed human nature. Human nature evolves. So human nature evolves, or actually human nature is shaped by culture. And culture, in turn, evolves. And a big and important part of this evolution is economic base. Now, there's an important disclaimer, because is Marx a reductionist? Is Marx a reductionist or determinist? So I would say that, if we read Marx carefully, Marx should not be read as a reductionist. Marx is not a crude reductionist or determinist. So I would say that the economic base does not really determine the cultural or ideological superstructure, but the economic base plays a certain important and leading role. And unless we take it into account, we miss the point. Again, this may sound a bit vague, but hopefully I'll make it clearer in a second. So basically, again, I would say that Marx is writing, and Marx is important to me. Marx is writing against the project of enlightenment, and we talked about this before. In fact, I've spent several classes talking about the enlightenment project. How this idea that somehow, come on, Word, help me. Enlightenment project. Yeah, so this idea that rational humans freely obey rational laws. So again, we discover laws of society in a similar fashion to the way in which we discover laws of nature. And understanding the laws of nature allows us to improve our lives. And in a similar fashion, understanding the laws of society would help us, rebuild society in a different fashion. And you see, some people could say, well, this is only possible if human nature is pro-social. So this is going to be an important element, and many philosophers, would seek to challenge this. So, is human nature actually pro-social? And Marx is going to say, well, you see, the problem is that there is no such thing. There is no fixed human nature, and this can be seen in very concrete terms. Imagine your ancestor, your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather or grandmother living, let's say, 10,000 years ago. Their life is just so completely different from yours. Not because their DNA is different. The DNA, as far as we can tell, has mostly stayed the same. But what is really different is that the social conditions are different. And it's like, in many ways, like all of this a possibility of development, intellectual development, cultural development, philosophical development, scientific development, but also artistic development, but also economic development, right? So let's talk about, again, the various forms of development. Let's say artistic, economic, intellectual, cultural, etc. So all of these are enabled by, broadly speaking, cooperation in the broad sense. And some people may come in and say, oh, no. Actually, the cause of development is not cooperation, but competition. And that's fine. In fact, Marx is the first person to say this, right? So we're going to get to this idea, hopefully later today at some point. But for Marx, the most important thing that happens to humanity ever in all of its history, the best and the most important thing, is actually capitalism. Because capitalism through its, and again, so sort of, this is market competition, capitalist market competition is actually a form of cooperation. Competition. Is a form of cooperation. Is a form of cooperation in the sense that it is a form of coordination. Is a form of cooperation, or if you want, coordination. And definitely, there needs to be an important cooperative element in order for the market system to work. Like, for example, you need to have contracts, and contracts need to be enforced. Like, if you agree to sell me something and I agree to buy it from you, there needs to be this important cooperative element that I give you the money and you give me the goods. Like, this has to actually happen. If we lived in a Hobbesian war of all against all, market economy would be impossible. So let me write this. So market is impossible in a Hobbesian war. Let me write this, war, like this. This is actually, this is the way Hobbes spells war in his story. So anyway, so what I'm driving at is that, and you know, I kept talking about this even in previous classes, how in many ways society tells us what is good. Society tells us what is just. Society tells us what is beautiful. Society tells us what is noble. You know, as children, we imbibe, what's the right phrase? We are infused with the social ideas and social ideals which guide our life. Again, we talked about Durkheim, this idea of anomie, right? That society gives us guidance. And not necessarily saying it's a good thing, but that's the way it happens, basically. That's the way things are, right? And so what I'm driving at is that you could say that society restricts individuals. You know, again, I'm going back to this question: is human nature pro-social? Is human nature pro-social, right? So maybe I should even get this into the slide. And the idea is that, like, society enables such level of development that it seems to me like it's meaningless to say that human nature would be antisocial. Society enables us so much that then, yes, society is also a seat of conflict, and society also sometimes takes advantage of us, but at least potentially. So actually, society is at times conflictual. Let's say at least at times. Society is at least at times conflictual. Let's say at least to some extent. Let's say to some lesser or greater extent. And there can be debates about this. Lesser or greater extent conflictual. But actual societies are, right? But potentially, society is, let me put it this way, overwhelmingly enabling. Again, if we think of progress in terms of arts, sciences, technology, so So again, especially in terms of arts, science, and technology, it's hard to imagine like any kind of advantage of this conflictual or solitary life. Anyway, I'm not sure if this is the best way to phrase it. So okay, this is an important point. I'm not sure if it's very clear. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Let me move forward. So I start with the Enlightenment project. That this idea that rational humans freely obey rational laws. Right. This was the promise of the Enlightenment. And the question today is, can we realize the project of enlightenment? Is the project of enlightenment realizable? So again, let me maybe copy paste this. And what I want to say is that basically the basis of the Enlightenment project, as far as I can tell, is dialogue. So enlightenment is uniquely rooted, is fundamentally rooted in the idea of the dialogue, or if you want, in the practice of the dialogue, in the well, anyway, let me leave it this way. Idea of the dialogue, as Mill, for example, would put it, free and equal discussion. In terms of politics, but also in terms of science, right? So the scientific progress uniquely is based on scientists being able to freely challenge each other's ideas. And again, this idea of the peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. Peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. And here, I guess, like what I'm driving at is that enlightened, or let's say benevolent, or no, let's put it this way: despotism may be benevolent, but there's never a guarantee. There's never a guarantee that despotism will stay benevolent. And in fact, unless, as John Stuart Mill would say, unless you have something like freedom of speech, you cannot even know whether your regime is benevolent or not. So, sort of, again, without the freedom of speech, it's impossible to even say. So without the freedom of speech, it's impossible to even attest whether despotism is actually benevolent. Despotism, whether any regime is benevolent, whether any regime is benevolent, because it is a factual question, and in order to answer this factual question in a proper manner, you need some sort of freedom of discussion. So what we are getting at is, again, this idea of freedom, I guess. So actual freedom. And this for me, maybe I should have begun with this, right? So people are going to ask, what is the chief value for Marx? What is Marx about? What is Marx about? And I want to say, very importantly, Marx is about freedom, not equality, not justice, but freedom. Maybe certain forms of equality, so maybe particular forms of equality or justice are instrumentally valuable for freedom, but valuable only for freedom. But they are good only because, and if, let's say the particular forms of equality are good only insofar as they promote freedom. For freedom. Something like that. And, well, you could say, if you want, in a quasi-Epicurean or a quasi-utilitarian fashion, that maybe what we really want is not really freedom, but happiness. So, But I want to leave this question to the side because, again, if you go back to this previous slide, you cannot, despotism may be benevolent, but there's never a guarantee that despotism will be benevolent. So, freedom is a necessary requirement for happiness, at least for reliable happiness. So, in this sense, I think, there needs to be no debate between the two. So, yeah. So again, we are talking about freedom, and here's the thing: freedom, again, according to the Enlightenment project. So within the project of enlightenment, and I still cannot spell. Within the project of enlightenment, freedom requires conditions. There are conditions of freedom, right? And there are two kinds of conditions, right? So conditions of freedom. And Marx is going to contrast what he calls mere political emancipation versus true human emancipation. And mere political emancipation refers to formal freedom. So formal freedom versus real freedom. But it's important that formal freedom is a necessary, although not as sufficient, but is a necessary condition of true human freedom. And so so it's a long story, and Marx has a theory of history. So theory of history. And in this theory of history, we go through stages. So maybe we begin with primitive communism. Then we proceed to feudalism. Then we proceed to capitalism. And then finally, maybe there's communism. Right? Let me write communism with a question mark. And what happens is that in a quasi-Darwinian fashion, so compared to Darwin, the next form, so let me just write primitive C. Communism with a question mark because, well, Marx doesn't write about communism very much. Marx mostly writes about capitalism. He's much more an analyst of capitalism rather than he is a philosopher of communism. Anyway, so if we comparing Marx to Darwin, again, there's this idea that modes of production, and when we say mode of production, we mean socioeconomic formation. In many ways, this is like the main characteristic of any given society. So it's like a mode of existence of a society. Modes of production are in competition with each other. And the more efficient modes of production, more efficient ones drive less efficient. More efficient drive less efficient to extinction. How, again, the idea is that, let's say, capitalism, this is the most important example for Marx, how capitalism drives feudalism to extinction. Capitalism drives feudalism to extinction. And yeah, so what happens is that in the name, so basically Marx is going to say that slavery and serfdom are, so slavery and serfdom are economically inefficient. Especially compared to what he calls formally free labor. Formally free labor. Now, this is more or less a matter of empirical fact. And I think that basically Marx is right when he says this, but it's an empirical question, so we can settle it empirically. Again, Marx would point to examples of how industrialized Britain outcompetes feudal India, or let's say feudal China, in economic terms, but also in military terms. But we have to understand that after the Industrial Revolution, and in many ways, Industrial Revolution and French Revolution are two key events for Marx. In many ways, maybe all of Marx's philosophy is about trying to work through the implications of the Industrial Revolution, maybe even versus the French Revolution, versus the promise of the French Revolution. Again, so French Revolution promises us liberty, equality, fraternity, right? Liberty, equality, fraternity. But Industrial Revolution leads to basically, again, this rich get richer, poor get poorer. Rich get richer, so rich become richer, and poor become poorer. So polarization. Is this empirically true? Well, it's a complicated question, and I don't necessarily want to settle this right now. But as far as I can tell, especially if we look at planet Earth today, where the 7 billion people alive on planet Earth, it seems that there's something to this idea that, again, contrary to Adam Smith. So Adam Smith famously proclaims that it's a very famous quote from Smith, that in a well-ordered society, the division of labor leads to universal opulence. Universal opulence, right? So this is the wealth of nation, right? So wealth for all, right? Even for the poorest members of society. So even the poorest, right? And this, for Adam Smith, was the moral justification of capitalism. Moral justification of capitalism. And in fact, you can say that Adam Smith is in this sense, is a proto-Marxist, or there are quasi-Marxist elements. So quasi-Marxist elements in Smith. Because again, the justification of capitalism is that it actually benefits everyone, including the poorest, right? And if you look at the world today, and if you look at the industrial base of capitalism in China, and especially the reserve army of unemployed in Africa today, which definitely, the labor market is global labor market, right? So if we look at the whole world, 7 billion people, it's a big question. It's not a clear question that everybody benefits from the system, including the poorest members. And but that's all fine. Why should we care? But why should we care about but why care? So, but why care about inequality? Why care about inequality? Why is inequality a bad thing? Maybe inequality is good. And here's, I think, again, we go back to this question of conditions of freedom. And ultimately, the idea is that the guarantee of my freedom, the only reliable guarantee of my freedom, the only reliable guarantee of my freedom is some form of Republican autonomy. Has to be some form of Republican autonomy. Sort of has to rest, has to be instantiated. The only reliable guarantee of my freedom is actually functioning Republican institutions. Actually functioning institutions of Republican self-government. So basically, like I can only be free. Like my freedom can only be guaranteed by my compatriots, by other citizens who are willing to protect my freedom. So I can only be free if other people protect my freedom. I can only be free as a citizen. I can be free only if other free citizens protect my freedom. Other fellow okay, let's say my fellow free citizens protect my freedom. So you see, again, like for Marx, it's, you know, people, when they think about Marx, they tend to think about, Gulag or Kolkhoz. And, so, let me even write this. So not Gulag and not Kolkhoz, right? So what we are talking about for Marx, we are talking about, again, real conditions of freedom. Again, as he says, the free development of each is a condition for the free development of all. Sorry, I lost my slide. So again, free development of each is a condition of the free development of all, right? So maybe this is less important, so let me put this in brackets, but still, it is at least to some extent important. Let me try to go back. So again, so like actually functioning institutions of public self-government, so something like democracy, approximately. And Marx definitely is a supporter of democracy. Now, he doesn't like the word democracy because there's a difference between true democracy versus, capitalist parliamentarism. And okay, actually, you know what? Let's maybe make this another slide, right? So why are we not living in a true democracy? Or maybe we are. Maybe we are. That's the question. Let's talk about this. So, and again, remember, we're talking about the conditions of freedom. Conditions of freedom. Conditions of freedom. Conditions. And I suppose the basic idea is that citizens, again, in order for democracy to really function, effectively, people need, the citizens at large, right? So all citizens. So all, or at least the vast majority of citizens. So all, or at least most citizens need to have the resources, possibility, enabling conditions, right? Enabling conditions for political participation need to have, okay, enabling conditions, I don't know, need to have the conditions, the resources, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Need to have the economic and temporal resources to participate politically. So basically what we need is, like, as a prerequisite of citizenship, we need a guarantee of a basic economic security. Well, I should say security in general, but also economic security. So basically, sort of basic security, including economic security. Guarantee of basic security, and you need education, and you need free time. And without these things, democracy is impossible. Democracy is impossible without these things. Let me maybe even write this. Otherwise, democracy is impossible. A functioning democracy is impossible. In the sense that an uneducated and overworked working class cannot exercise cannot exercise choice and cannot exercise control, cannot exercise neither choice, neither like a rational choice whom to vote for, nor control, nor effective control, like supervision of elected candidates, of elected officials, right? So neither rational choice, which is voting, right, and nor effective control. So you see, again, we go back to this issue of conflict and consensus, right? And Marx is going to say, so conflict versus consensus. So in a well-governed society, in a well-ordered, or in a well-governed society, let's say, in a well-governed society, my fellow citizens are the guarantors of my freedom, are the guarantee of my own freedom, right? So this idea how my fellow citizens, maybe they also restrict my freedom in the sense that my freedom of movement ends when the other person's nose begin. So my fellow citizens maybe restrict me to some small extent, maybe restrict me to some minor extent. But first and foremost, my fellow citizens enable my freedom. So, are you going to have taxes in communism? Well, it's a complicated story. What exactly communism looks like? You know, are you going to have money in communism? Are you going to have taxes in communism? This question is more complicated than people usually give Marx credit for. But still, it's like, imagine that you have taxes in communism or some kind of community service. I gladly pay my taxes. Because again, in a well-ordered society, because my taxes, the money of my taxes is going to be used to guarantee my own freedom. It's like I gladly pay my taxes because ultimately they enable my fellow citizens to guarantee my freedom. Right? And again, I mentioned this already a second ago, like in the previous slide, right? Uneducated, overworked working class cannot exercise rational choice and effective control. Uneducated, poor, impoverished, let's say impoverished, overworked, populace, let's write, not to use populace, cannot exercise rational choice, effective control. And this is basically why I think Marx is so important, and why I think that if you believe in the project of enlightenment, you have to be a Marxist in some sense, right? So if one believes in enlightenment, one has to be a Marxist, at least, as they say in foro interno. One has. Okay, well, one has to be a Marxist. At least in foro interno. This is a phrase from Thomas Hobbes. So in the sense that at least you have to wish for the Marxist system to come about. So at least in foro interno. So at least on the level of intention, basically. That is to say, in intention. Again, why? Because an uneducated, impoverished, overworked populace cannot exercise rational choice, and therefore democracy is impossible, right? And this I think is the basic idea. And if you take the insights of I don't know, Plato, or, well, actually, you know what, Aristotle, Hobbes, let's take, I'm not sure about Locke. Locke is complicated, controversial. Let's write Rousseau. Hegel with a question mark, I'm not sure if I want to bring Hegel, but definitely John Stuart Mill. Let's bring some other people, some other big guns. Jürgen Habermas, right? So if you take these people, you know, the only way to make and they are all, well, okay, Plato and Aristotle are not really Democrats, but they are supporters of a rational form of government. So I would say that broadly speaking, I can interpret them as in some form supporting the Enlightenment project. So basically, Enlightenment project from Plato through Aristotle, Hobbes, Rousseau, Mill, and Habermas, that in order to make their project work, you need to have Marx. You need to have the Marxist insight that basically, without guarantees of economic security, democracy cannot function. And this is as simple as it gets. And my personal interpretation, again, colleagues, I understand these are my biases. Feel free to disagree with me. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? Full disclosure, I might be wrong, okay? I'm coming to you from a particular perspective. But as far as I can tell, problems such as, I don't know, global warming. By the way, maybe you don't believe in global warming. Who knows? Global warming, or the COVID pandemic, or I don't know, the risk of asteroid hitting the Earth, asteroid hitting the Earth, or whatever other problems we have. Let's say overpopulation, or poverty. Well, actually, crime, and racism and sexism. Again, the Marx's insight that all these problems cannot be really solved, cannot be really reliably solved until we have a functioning democracy in place. Until we have a functioning democracy in place, and we cannot have that. And we cannot have a functioning democracy in place. We cannot have a functioning democracy in place until we have the basic economic preconditions of functioning democracy in place. Until we have the basic economic preconditions of a functioning democracy in place. So one way to summarize and one way to express this is this notion that political democracy requires economic democracy. This is, I would say, in one way, this would be a way to summarize Marx. This would be, for my money, this may be like the most important idea in all of Marx. And you could say, well, is it such a complicated thought? And I would say, again, of the major political philosophers, nobody expresses it with such vividness as does Marx. And like all these problems of commodity fetishism or ideology, I'm not sure if I'll get to them today, but like all these problems uniquely require Marx's economic insights to be expressed. Okay. So, what should I talk about next? Notice I didn't, okay, so I didn't talk about communism, right? And Marx doesn't write about communism very much. But communism, basically, the way I would express this is, again, this functioning democracy. Communism is ultimately about democracy. And, ways to make it work. And the only reason why Marx doesn't use the word democracy is because for him, democracy is this travesty, is this, actually existing democracies are not democratic at all. So he prefers to not even use the term. Okay. So, let me double check how much time I have left and see what else I can go through. And again, if you are looking for maybe a more coherent presentation of all of this, I urge you to look at at the lecture I've posted this morning. It is slightly more condensed and maybe slightly less haphazard. So maybe I can talk about maybe I can talk about tensions in Marx. This is something I meant to begin with, but let me maybe go back to this question, go back to this issue. So one tension in Marx is that Marx was an activist, but at the same time he was also an analyst or a scientist or a scholar, or if you want, he was a philosopher. He was an activist, but also a philosopher. And Marx, as an activist, again, is trying to bring about change. He's a political activist. He's trying to bring about change, right? And Marx, as a philosopher, is trying to understand the world. And I think that these two sometimes run into one another, right? And I would say that Marx, as an activist, I have to say, mostly fails spectacularly, unfortunately. I'm inclined to say that it's probably not his fault, but he fails spectacularly in the sense that, like, do we actually see anything like what Marx talked about with respect to communism in the world today? And the answer is, well, maybe yes, maybe no. Well, actually, you know what? Before I proceed with these tensions, let me actually talk about this. Are we living in communism, right? And I would say that, again, the one very valuable idea in Marx, and this is my own personal interpretation of Marx. So Marx is talking about ideal types. So ideal types in Marx. With a question mark, this is my own interpretation. Well, it's not just my own interpretation, but it's a possible interpretation, a possible but controversial interpretation. And the three ideal types that we have in Marx. The first one is feudalism. Notice I'm going to skip slave-owning society. For the purposes of this presentation, it's like I don't want to go there, right? So under feudalism, the idea would be that you have formal unfreedom, in the sense that some people exercise direct political control over other people. So the lords exercise domination, like open domination over the serfs. So lords openly dominate the serfs. This is whenever I talk about feudalism, I'm reminded of John Locke's phrase. So compared to Locke, Locke uses this phrase. He says, "Direct slavery under the force of war." Direct slavery under the force of war. I am not going to distinguish between slavery and serfdom for the purposes of this class. So it's like, as an oversimplification, slavery and serfdom are the same thing. Okay, slavery is equal to serfdom as an oversimplification. So this is feudalism. Now under capitalism we have formal freedom, but really we are unfree, says Marx, because we are actually ruled by what he calls coercive laws of competition in the market. Coercive laws of competition. Let's say coercive laws of market competition. And here's the idea. Imagine you have 24 hours in a day, right? And Marx is going to say that what happens is that if you are a worker, then basically all of your 24 hours you spend working. Now, immediately, sort of the controversial thing that I'm going to say is that maybe we already, in some countries in the world, maybe we have already gone beyond capitalism to some extent. So to the extent that people have free time and can do with their free time what they want, maybe we have already gone beyond capitalism. And it's like, I think we need to remember that Marx is writing in the 19th century, and it's like 19th century capitalism is very different from 20th century capitalism. So are we already, to some extent, in communism? Right? And again, 19th century is very different from 21st century, right? In the sense that, like in 19th century, again, probably the most vivid description comes from Engels, where he talks about children. So children in Manchester. So children in Manchester with brittle bone disease. So children in early industrial with brittle bone disease. Look this up. Brittle bone disease. Or maybe don't, because it's going to make you upset, right? So people are living in such horrible and horrifying conditions, right? And working, so like a 16, 18-hour working day, right? Etc., etc. So conditions are really, really, really horrifying, right? And we don't have this in the 21st century, at least in the most advanced countries, most economically advanced countries of the world. Let me go back here. So in this, so again, ideal types. So we're talking about, if you want, again, spherical cow in a vacuum. So spherical cow in a vacuum. So I'm not talking about feudalism, but I'm talking about spherical feudalism in a vacuum. I'm not talking about capitalism. I'm talking about spherical capitalism in a vacuum. And in the spherical capitalism in a vacuum, what happens is that a worker basically works for 24 hours. Or let's say worker is unfree for all 24 hours a day, right? In the sense that you work, yes, but then you rest for work, but then you have sex as very important. Sex is also work, right? Because people having sex, they are producing children who are children. Children are future workers. So sex is future generations is production of future generations of workers. Future generation of workers. Let's just write future workers. Etc. etc. So in this sense, like the worker for all 24 hours, even if a worker has some time, maybe to drink a pint of beer or maybe to watch a movie, even if but this is not really free time because you are tired after work, and this is just you're trying to recuperate for a new day of work, or maybe watching a movie is just a way to motivate you to work more. But the capitalist is also unfree in this spherical capitalism in a vacuum. But the capitalist is also unfree because what the capitalist needs to do is, because of the fear of crisis, or I should say crises, fear of crises makes the capitalist also work 24 hours a day. Fear of crisis also forces the capitalist to work 24 hours a day. Again, this is spherical capitalism in a vacuum. It's not exactly the way it happens in reality, obviously. Is also unfree for all 24 hours. And again, it's like this idea, okay, the fear of crises and this risk of going bankrupt. And again, I'm sort of tempted to say, I have students, right? Well, many of you will work for Ernst & Young, for something like 14 hours a day. Sort of I have students in unpaid Ernst & Young internship for 14 hours a day. I don't know. Maybe this doesn't happen anymore, but it sure did happen back in my day. And I keep in touch with some of, well, anyway, like I've heard stories from ISEF students of how this actually happens. And the question is why are you the sons and daughters of the bourgeoisie? Why do you have to work so hard? And the answer is simple. It's like use it or lose it. It's like you gotta be good shepherds of the capital, and otherwise you run the risk of going bankrupt. Maybe not, if not in the first generation, maybe in the second generation. And here's a good question. Here's a good question. Colleagues, you're listening to me. How many of you have actually decided? So is it you? Is it you who decided to become economists? Is it you who decided to become economists? Who decided to become economists? Or is it the market that decided for you? Or is it, or market, that decided for you, right? And my implication is that it is the market which decides. The market tells you who you're going to be, right? As a worker, the market tells you you're going to be a shoemaker or a delivery man or a driver or something like that, right? Nobody is born a driver, right? We don't have a gene in our DNA for being drivers. But capitalism forces us into our roles as workers, but also capitalism forces us into our roles as capitalists. Like capitalism forces you to learn stock trading and binary options and foreign exchange tricks, how you short sale ruble, or diversification and portfolios, this kind of thing. Like, again, capitalism decides for you. You're going to have to do this, otherwise you're going to there will be no reliable way to stay the bourgeois. Again, this is under spherical capitalism in a vacuum, because reality is slightly more complicated than that. Okay, so finally, let's get to communism, because this is important. What is then the difference? What is the difference, perceived difference between capitalism and communism? So under communism, we are talking about free and rational, so free and rational decision. I should say free, rational, democratic decision, right? So, and in this sense, I want to say that we already live in communism. So again, these are three ideal types. So I want to say that the world is a combination of all three ideal types. So reality is a combination of all three types, of all three ideal types, which is feudalism, capitalism, and communism. So to the extent so like if you open your eyes and you look around the world today, do we have remnants of feudal institutions? And I want to say yes, especially if you look at. I'm not going to give any examples. Okay, this is the beauty of teaching a class in philosophy. I don't have to worry about examples. You understand what countries of the world I'm talking about. So in certain places, you see again this what Locke would call direct slavery under the force of war. Direct slavery under the force of war. Formal unfreedom, where you have something like the lords who openly dominate serfs. So let's say dictatorships. So dictatorships, like military dictatorships, or forms of patrimonialism. Maybe mafia would be an example of that, right? So capitalism, we are living in capitalism to the extent that it is the market. Again, so coercive laws of the market. Coercive laws of the market. Right? And you see, it's a good question. It's a good question about the world we live in, right? So I don't like giving biographical examples, but maybe I should. You see, was it my free decision to become a philosophy professor? And the answer is, unfortunately, it's complicated, right? So imagine somehow that I would not need to worry about economic security. Imagine that somehow, for some reason, I could be certain that my economic security is guaranteed. Would I do exactly the same things I'm doing? And the answer is yes and no, yes and no. There are some things that I am doing for the university against my will. And I'm doing them only because I have this fear of economic insecurity. And the university is paying me money. And even if the university collapsed tomorrow, I would still do philosophy because I love philosophy and I'm passionate about philosophy. And I have been doing philosophy before I was ever paid for it. But certain things, certain classes or certain topics, I have to teach. This is, if you want, this is forced labor, or as Marx would call it, forced division of labor. Again, this is, by the way, an important distinction in Marx between forced division of labor and voluntary division of labor. It's so important that maybe forced versus that I should probably make a new slide about this. Voluntary division of labor. Right? So forced under feudalism and capitalism, and voluntary under communism. So you see, I want to say that to the extent that what you are doing, you are forced to do by economic necessity, we live in capitalism. To the extent that you voluntarily do something, like an example that I could give is Sunday Philosophy Club. Sunday Philosophy Club, right? Or something like that, especially when people engage in hobbies together. Or people come to my office hours and we have discussions. Some of you stay behind class for much longer than is needed for your grade. You just have a question that you're curious, that you want to discuss, and you find this interesting and engaging, right? And notice we are engaged in this together, and we are enabling each other's freedom. Well, actually, no. You know what? Some people say that communism has been tried and failed. I want to say nonsense. This is such complete and utter nonsense. Soviet-style communism has been tried and failed, but Soviet-style communism, I would say, is not real communism in any shape, matter, or form. Right? The real examples of communism, I would say, are the two that come to my mind are Wikipedia and open source software. These are people. Wikipedia is made as a free gift, in cooperation with others. People make articles. They're not forced in any shape, matter, or form. They simply enjoy doing this. And also maybe another example that I like to give is you have this wonderful inventor whose name is Isaac Newton, but you also have Isaac Newton Lewis. Isaac Newton Lewis. Look up Isaac Newton Lewis. He's the inventor of possibly the best machine gun of the First World War, the Lewis gun, right? And he has gifted his invention as a free gift to the government of the United States of America just because he was a patriot. So again, and you could say, well, Wikipedia, this is a strange example. No, it's not a strange example, because the progress in terms of so notice Wikipedia is a proxy in terms of scientific and technological progress. Scientific and technological progress. So basically, again, this idea of robotic communism, if you want, robotic communism. Communism which runs on like fully automated luxury communism. Fully automated luxury communism. Something like that. Okay. I'm jumping all over the place a little bit. But yeah, so I want to say that to some extent, it seems to me that our reality is a combination of all three types. And communism, again, in terms of Wikipedia, or maybe in terms of Nordic countries, countries in which really democracy seems to work. Like I've been, I had a chance to live in Denmark for a period of time in Copenhagen, and I have seen members of parliament ride bicycles in the street, right? So maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that examples of countries like Denmark or Norway, uh, um, like there's certainly an element in Denmark which seems to make Denmark closer to the Marx's ideal of communism. So like it seems that Denmark is already partly in communism, the way Marx would define it, because people freely and rationally can decide. Okay, I don't have a lot of time, so let me give you this quote. This is the most important quote, so don't worry too much. So what is communism, right? Communism, or the realm of freedom. Communism, or the realm of freedom. Notice freedom. We're talking about freedom, not equality, not justice. Freedom is the most important value for Marx. The realm of freedom, Marx says, really begins only where labor determined by necessity and external expediency ends. So necessity and, well, okay, let me just say labor determined by necessity ends, right? And the reduction of the length of the working day is its basic prerequisite. The basic prerequisite in communism, in many ways, like the main idea of communism, is the reduction of the length of the working day. So in fact, let's look at this quote in slightly more detail, and I'll let you go after this. So again, Marx says, in fact, the realm of freedom actually begins only where labor, which is determined by necessity and mundane consideration, ceases. Labor determined by necessity ceases, and realm of freedom begins. In the very nature of things, the realm of freedom lies beyond the sphere of actual material production. Just as the savage must wrestle with nature to satisfy his wants, to maintain and reproduce life, so must civilized man, and he must do so in all social formations under all possible modes of production. So it seems probably including communism. Because Marx says under all social formations, with his development, with the development of men, right, with men's development, with, let's say, man's development, the realm of physical necessity expands as a result of his wants. So our wants increase. But at the same time, the forces of production, which satisfy these wants, also increase. So communism is not about asceticism. Communism is not about self-sacrifice. Communism, again, Marx, harking back to this idea of the Enlightenment project, Marx insists that in communism there will be no conflict between altruism and egoism. There is no conflict between altruism and egoism in communism for Marx. Anyway, and again, communism is not about somehow ascetically limiting our desires. No, our desires will expand, but so will the forces of production at the same time. Freedom in this field can only consist, so freedom in the realm of necessity. So freedom in the realm of necessity can only consist in socialized man, the associated producers, rationally regulating their interchange with nature, bringing it under their common control, instead of being ruled by it as by a blind force of nature, right? So even in communism, there's also a realm of necessity. Even in communism, you need to have doctors, you need to produce vaccines and maybe produce food. But we do this not by being ruled by coercive laws of competition in the market, but we do this rationally. Associated producers do this rationally, and achieving this with the least expenditure of energy and under conditions most favorable to and worthy of our human nature. But nonetheless, it remains the realm of necessity. So realm of necessity remains the realm of necessity. And only beyond it begins that development of human energy, which is an end in itself, the true realm of freedom, which, however, can blossom forth only with the realm of necessity as its basis. The shortening of the working day is its basic prerequisite. So next time somebody points you to, Stalin, Gulag, Kolkhoz, whatever, and says that, oh, Marx was wrong, you will see that they are wrong. They are wrong. Soviet China and Soviet Russia has nothing on Marx, absolutely nothing on Marx. Again, communism, the basic prerequisite of communism, in fact, to oversimplify, I would say the basic idea of communism is the reduction of the length of the working day. And why do we need the reduction of the length of the working day? Because it is an enabling condition for any Republican government, for any democratic government. Because in order to be good citizens, people need to have free time and energy to participate in politics. And this is why, again, reduction of the length of the working day is the basic necessity. I should be finishing now. So let me summarize. So reduction of the working day leads to free time to for education and engaging in politics, for free time for educated political participation, which guarantees freedom. Well, it actually guarantees freedom, and if you want freedom and progress. And this is what ultimately what communism is about. And notice, this question, are you going to have property under communism? Are you going to have money? I think all this are secondary questions to this most important issue. Anyway, unfortunately, I think that I have run out of time. So I hope that you have found this useful. I hope that you will, take this to heart. Am I saying that you should believe in this? No, no way in seven hells. Question everything, right? We should question everything, including we should question Marxism. Nobody guarantees that this should be right. Nobody says that this has to be, true. But at least I want you to see the logic. And if we disagree with Marx, we should disagree with Marx for the right reasons, right? Not identify Marx with, kolkhoz and gulag, but identify the problems with this picture. Identify the problems with this picture, and see exactly what we disagree with and what we don't like in this particular phrase. So it's like, let me maybe end this. That I invite you to disagree with Marx, but disagree for right reasons. But disagree for the right reasons. And again, I think that there are many problems with Marx, many things which are not obvious and not necessarily proven. There's many places where one should question Marx and should disagree with Marx. But I think, again, like before we disagree, we need to have at least a basic understanding of what we're fighting against, right? And again, a very pompous title. I'll probably change it in a second, something less pompous. But I hope that I've managed to show you, throughout this lecture, at least the basic plausibility of Marx's picture. That even if you disagree with Marx, at least you see, like, it's not a stupid doctrine, even if you decide that it's wrong at the end of the day. Like, I hope you can see what Marx is driving at with his own ideas. Okay, so a million things I forgot to mention. If you want to know more about this, again, feel free to look at last year's lecture. It's much more condensed. It's much more substantive. Like, I get out many more ideas than I managed to do today. So anyway, colleagues, I definitely hope that this was stimulating. This was very stimulating for me, maybe even too stimulating. In general, thank you very much for your company. And I hope you had at least, ultimately I hope you had as much fun as I did. And if you have any questions, I'm sure you do, I would be more than happy to discuss them in the seminar. And otherwise, please stay safe, take care, and I will see you. I will see you hopefully very soon. So once again, take care.